Like, what I think that means is that the next wave of software just has no UI. Essentially, you're going to be able to trigger workflows from whatever point you're at. So if you're on X and you get a great idea, you can at GoDaddy probably in some near future and get your domain registered. And like that's, I think, where things go.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Welcome back to the Future Tech and AMP Foresight podcast. I'm your AI host, Marc Verbenkov's deepfake avatar, and this is episode 192. In this episode, I'm joined by Dan Goikhman, the CEO of Dappier and a longtime entrepreneur at the edge of digital innovation. Together, we explore how AI agents are transforming the internet, from static pages to intelligent, conversational interfaces that adapt to each user. Dan shares his vision for invisible software, explains the shift toward agentic design, and unpacks the idea of a digital memory passport that could store your preferences, history, and interactions across platforms. We also touch on some big-picture themes: what a decentralized, agent-powered internet might look like, how content creators should be fairly compensated in an AI-driven ecosystem, and how users might retain control over their own data in this new paradigm. If you're curious about the future of human-AI interaction, this conversation offers a sharp and thought-provoking perspective. Now about my guest today. Dan Goikhman is a veteran entrepreneur with 2 decades of experience at the intersection of media and emerging technology. He is the CEO and co-founder of Dappier, a company building AI-native infrastructure that transforms websites and apps into intelligent, interactive experiences through autonomous AI agents. Previously, Dan founded Mojiva, one of the first mobile ad networks, and Power.tv, a connected TV publishing platform acquired by Decentral in 2021. His work continues to shape the future of digital media, advertising, and AI-driven user engagement.
Hi there, Dan. Thank you very much for coming onto the podcast today. Looking forward to talking about obviously AI, but obviously diving into AI agents and kind of what's going on there. Thanks for coming on, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely, Marc. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat.
So you have a pretty interesting past. Was there anything specific that brought you into the world of AI, or was that kind of always in the forefront of your mind to come into?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, I spent about the last 20 years at the intersection of, I would say, like, the easiest way to boil it down is like media and some emerging platforms. So some new platform emerges that changes the way that content is discovered and distributed. And that usually gets my attention. Sometimes, a little bit too early, but yeah, in any case, we saw kind of, when I saw ChatGPT emerge and kind of captivate 100 million people's attention pretty quickly, it just kind of dawned on me that the way that we engage with content was going to change. And I knew that I wanted to spend a lot of time thinking about that and building in that space, and then started diving into projects, kind of eventually getting towards, Dappier, which is what I'm working on now.
Right, which we'll definitely get into maybe in the middle section of the podcast.
Sure.
Should we maybe start off with, maybe giving a little bit of context to, we can say the ecosystem or, certain industries. I mean, we're going to be talking a little bit more about AI agents. As I've mentioned to you before the recording, I've had a couple guests come on, and it seems to be like I'm getting different messages, if you will. Everybody's got their own perspective on, the capacity of AI agents, the time it's going to take for them to become really, really useful. Could you maybe speak to how, what changes have you seen over the last, say, year or so of the capacity and capability of these AI agents? Like, are you still incredibly excited about about what they're doing and what they're going to do, or are you maybe a little bit unsure about the future with regards to these tools?
No, I mean, look, you know, I think the definition is in flux, right? I think there's a lot of conversation of, agentic workflows and, AI agents and what that means and how effectively this, AI agents will effectively be everywhere. I think we've gone beyond, kind of, let's say the last year there was a lot of imagination pent up in like, co-pilots. So like there was this, I felt, and this is a world we saw kind of every day in Dappier, like, kind of felt like co-pilots were eating the web. That was like this one thing where like every core consumer app from Google to Facebook to Instagram to LinkedIn to Amazon started introducing, co-pilots. And then we saw, things like Operator emerge and start to show you the promise of agents that can actually do things. I think there's a difference between agents and then like autonomous agents that can actually go off and act beyond their instruction set. So I think, depending on how you define it, the world will either take a really long time to catch up or we'll see things sooner than we expected. But through my lens, I think, in today's world, it feels like agents are moving towards, executing workflows, um, through kind of natural language instruction. I think that's where we're at today, which is a pretty exciting step forward when you think about where we were a year ago, which was just asking questions, right? And that
Yeah.
I think is the trend.
And like what I try to do in these conversations as well, for my own value, but I think also for the audiences, is like tangible examples. Do you have maybe like a more popular one to share with us that like gives like paint a picture for how these agents are actually working today? Like obviously we'll talk about what's going to happen tomorrow and what you guys are working on, but is there like a solid use case that you're seeing being utilized quite a bit that is agentic AI doing
Yeah, I
its
mean, yeah, I think it's like I- in my view, I think where it's really being used today is in like hustle culture, right? So, I think that what we're seeing are lots and lots of startups focused on sales assistant, SDR, like sales, BDR, kind of these things that are research based and email based. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of spam in our LinkedIn and our DMs. These are really, really natural extensions. Like, anyone that has to process information, and then kind of enter it into a database or do something quick with it. Let's say with a spray and pray type model, right?
Mm.
Yeah, I think those are like where a lot of the agentic workflows have accrued to today, in my opinion. Seem to see a lot of companies talking about, kind of AI agents that engage with your ICP. Now, maybe that's skewed. Maybe that's in my feed because I'm an entrepreneur and I see, tools that, are trying to be sold to me. But from a 30,000-foot view, I think there's a lot of research-based applications and there's a lot of like hustle culture-based applications that seem to be making their way into various stages, like for small business, for solopreneurs, and for enterprise. I will help you find leads. I will help you send emails. I will help you communicate with your customers. I will help you execute first level, tier one customer support. Those seem to be the flows where we see it today. Um, I don't think we have like the dream execution yet for any. And again, I could be biased. I could be biased, and I'm certainly not aware of everything that's out there. But it feels to me that that's where we're stuck right now. We've gone from kind of research to executing basic like sales tasks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's if I have the timeline correct, that's like 1 to 2 years where this transition has happened, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, which is pretty impressive when you actually think about it. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, the staggering numbers, I mean, again, like, ChatGPT every once in a while will put these numbers out around like the usage. at last I heard, right, it was like 500 million weekly actives, right? That's a lot of weekly actives. Like, so when we started our business, let's say, early 24, that was 100 million people had used it, right? Now it's 500 million people a week using it. That's a big number. Now, I don't know exactly what using it means. I'm sure that's, that's interesting, but like, we've gone from that to, very quickly starting to execute it in all kinds of workflows. And I certainly see in like, entrepreneur founder forums that I'm in, really wild use cases. Most of the use cases that I've seen are kind of the ones I've just talked about, which are like sales oriented. And then obviously, there's all these use cases that are like, image generation oriented, right? So essentially
Right.
like creativity has been unlocked in an interesting way.
Right. Yeah. Um, so I think like anybody listening to this podcast has this vision that has either been put into their mind or they've come up with themselves of, having the Jarvis of the future, right? Whether it's on your cell phone, your watch, or through some sort of, interesting user experience here. Like that I think is kind of propelling people into this space, into getting, some exposure to these AI agents. Now, I'm not asking you for a estimation on like how long it's going to take for something like that to come about, obviously. Um, but do you think that there's going to be maybe some reduced motivation or excitement in the next year or two, as it's probably going to take years and years for the Jaras to come out? Or do you think that there's going to be like new use cases, new places where this tools is going to be used, and that's going to just keep the motivation and excitement train going?
I think we're going to see, I think the excitement train. So I will tell you, and I've seen this from other people, I'm experiencing it almost on a daily basis now as a founder in the space. I've never experienced as much anxiety of
Okay.
due to the pace of change that's happening in the space. And I think we're seeing wild use cases. Like, again, I'm not an expert, right, from a technical standpoint, but
Yep.
we're seeing these kind of announces and glimpses of possibility. In my world, it's largely around, content distribution, monetization, all that kind of stuff. But we're seeing like really cool, stories emerge in, health and medicine, right? In gene therapies, in material science, in all of these spaces. So I think the pace of excitement is going to continue along the way for some period of time. As far as a reasonably good Jarvis-like experience, when I think about that, that's it feels like it shouldn't be that far away. And the reason I think it shouldn't be that far away is because at the end of the day, we already do this stuff. We just do it on our own. It comes down to connecting the pipes, right? Like, if anything, what I'm starting to experience, as I use one model more than another, is that, you're getting some level of lock-in to the models that you're using as you're sharing information with it and, kind of, you know, using it for various things in your life, whether it's, crafting an email to thinking about a presentation to coming up with a bedtime story for a kid. And you're doing that all within a single platform. There feels to be like there's going to be some natural lock in there. So I don't know how you're going to move from one thing to the other as easily. Um, but I do think if whatever that thing is can support, you know, ingesting my data, whether that is, you know, images and bank records and banking statements and credit card statements and, health apps, like the more I can connect into it, the more useful it'll be. And then it really comes down to a set of like natural language interfaces for this stuff. So to me, the Jarvis thing seems like science fiction. Practically speaking, I don't know that I see anything that prevents that from, existing today.
Very interesting. Yeah. Um, if only it was available today. I think, I'm a new entrepreneur myself, and it would just be amazing. Exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, when I talk about anxiety, like, you see and hear a lot of these stories about how quickly some of these companies are growing. And you're like, I mean, is there a set of tools that they're using that I don't know about, right?
Right.
Is it?
Right.
I mean, I'm sure some of it is, I'm sure some of it is vaporware, right? I'm sure there's a lot of noise out there. But, I look at things like Perplexity, right? And their kind of concept of integrating everywhere and their ability to be nimble. And I think, like, all right, so if that thing is kind of integrated everywhere and I can connect data points to it, which I think is on their roadmap. I think they've started to do that. Like, you connect your enterprise data, for instance, right? And so the more I can connect to it, the better it should act. Now, this just becomes a race to how quickly will companies adapt to their APIs being interacted with through a third party service. What is the definition of, like, like, what are the risks of that? I'm sure there are many risks, and that's probably the thing that slows things down. But technically speaking, I don't see why. Um, it's like, I forget who it was. I saw someone post today. Oh, great use case. I just uploaded all my credit card statements into Perplexity, and it kind of told me, I was able to identify some savings. I think, and so, like, if you can do that, and you go from there to, like, hey, can you actually go and, like, cancel my Netflix subscription or whatever it is,
Right.
you're to get the sharpness, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Smart lights in the home. So, like, just saying, hey, can you dim the lights? Like, that seems pretty reasonable, right? Alexa can almost do that. So, I think we're going to find a way to connect all these systems together.
Very cool. But I guess with that, the question of, like, who owns the data, how it's used, obviously comes up, right? Like, if Google has been this giant monopoly, and I think they're right in the middle of, having some shoot, I'm not going to speak out of turn, but there's some attempt to break them down, right? As has been for a while. Um,
Mhm.
if it's going to be this Perplexity, for instance, that all of our data is going to be dumped into, is there an opportunity to kind of decentralize the data that we're putting up, or, like, other tools are going to be competing with them, or is it really just going to be one or two or three of these large players that are going to be, producing the Jarvis of the future?
Yeah, look, I think that I think you're keying into something really interesting. My take is that lock-in that I'm feeling is, like, probably something a lot of people are feeling, and the way to solve that is through some sort of, like, portable passport to your memory, like, to your data. Um, and I think that's the race actually to win
Hmm.
in many ways. So that kind of digital twin, so to speak, of you is the thing to win. And then that, I think, should be snapped into whatever the best model of the day is, which is, I think, why a lot of people speculate that the models are getting kind of commoditized, and there's not a lot of like lock in there. If you can have that memory passport, which is why I believe you will see all of the frontier model makers build consumer services. Otherwise, they don't have a lot of defensibility.
Hmm. Interesting. So then, with this digital passport that you're talking about, is that, we've talked a lot about crypto in the past. Is that would be like some setup where you're owning your data, and you give these organizations the opportunity to buy some of your data to feed into these models, or, like, how, whether you're conceptualizing it, or have examples of businesses that are building it. What do you think
Yeah,
on
I
that?
mean, yeah, I think so. So I think, I mean, maybe it's decentralized, maybe it's on the blockchain and you allow folks to access it. Maybe that becomes kind of a business model for you, like,
Mm,
some sort of gig economy type work where your data is just sold to, whatever the highest bidder at any time. I think that's interesting. On the other side of it, right, it's more like, you know, your data is yours. You pay some small monthly fee to keep it all in one place and secure like almost like an Iron Mountain type service for you. And then you allow some mechanism where that can be easily plugged into the model. You're going to have your choice of model, right? Because they're commoditized theoretically. And so you plug that data into whatever, or maybe something sits in between that data passport and the model and makes choices based on what you need to get done. And then you actually just pay for those services, or, you're advertised to, right? So I need to plan a trip to, whatever, I'm trying to go on a road trip with my family, knowing what we like to do. Can you give me the optimal itinerary and suggest, what hotels we should stay at? Something like that plugged into, my data that really understands me and my family, then has a lot of opportunity. Like, if I'm trying to get the value of having a trip planned on my behalf, maybe I pay for that service. Or maybe there's a new kind of agentic ad that finds its way to me and says, look, we know, Dan and his family typically stay in these places. Let's recommend these places to them. Right. And so my view is that, there's some sort of service that is administered for you to store that kind of passport of data. And then there's a layer where the models are effectively fighting for your business. And you can either pay for it or you can kind of have it for free with advertising.
Hmm. Super interesting. Um, I like this idea of, or this example of like holidays and recommendations, um, for a question that relates to like what we've really seen with the internet, and I guess you could also say social media, with filter bubbles, right? We're seeing such a schism between like the political parties. Whether I'm in Canada, it's definitely grown over the last 10 to 15 years with the advent of social media. I can only assume that these kinds of filter bubbles, echo chambers, whatever you want to call it, is going to happen not just for the, political or philosophical ideas that we have in society, but also for, like, as you were saying, recommendations for holidays, right? If these AI are trained on your data or have access to your data and they're like, okay, you know, Dan and his family like, whatever, Asia, right? You're only going to get recommendations for Asia, but maybe you would really like Latin America, for instance. I know obviously this is like one example of for everything in life. Like I'm personally concerned about that quite a bit, because then you're gonna have such a
Yeah, you're saying you're kind of like it's a snake eating its own tail kind of thing
yeah,
over
yeah,
time. Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think, for sure, you know, um, what I like yesterday is not necessarily what I'm going to like tomorrow. Um, and I think that, we're in a dynamic world and, people are changing all the time. And so yes, I mean, in order to be truly useful, we have to account for that, right? I mean, you have to account for the fact that there has to be room for new ideas.
mhm,
And you're right. I think that's an interesting, really great point you make of like, you know, if we're defined by the algorithm that's, our social feed, then it's like we're into three things, right? And like
right,
whatever.
right,
And so, um, you would hope that the bias, or rather that there's no bias in the system that's being built, and really it's the model making a judgment just based on the data. And I think maybe that's the best way to think about it, right? I think, you know, if you were to look at, someone's bank statements, credit card history, Google Maps data, Apple Health data, um, maybe their email, like you'd have a pretty good sense of the person, right?
mhm,
And so, and probably the dynamic nature of the person too. So I think if there's no bias in the model, then you can probably solve for that.
interesting. Well, I certainly hope so.
Yeah, true. So
Yeah.
there has to be room for new ideas, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, absolutely, otherwise, it's kind of a bleak future that we're gonna be going into.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's shift gears here. So what are some of the main challenges that you're seeing with all of this coming forward, and how is your main company, Dappier, solving this?
Yeah, I mean, we're focused in a very I mean, I would say in a a consumer sector, right? So essentially, we started Dapper. I think I mentioned earlier, right, that I've been working at the intersection of media and emerging platforms for a long time, and when I started Dappier, kind of shortly after seeing the emergence of ChatGPT, it was really just like this thing where, if we have a service as people where we can ask a question and get a detailed answer, with not a lot of attribution as to where that answer came from, that feels like a search replacement. And if that's a search replacement, then it's going to become a challenge for for any industry that relies on traffic in order to monetize. And so our point of view is that, and some of this obviously has proven to become, true over the last 18, 20 months. It was like people like this experience, right? 100 million people like this question and answer experience. That means that we're going to see it everywhere. And sure enough, you had the wave of co-pilots, co-pilots on Amazon, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. And if that happens, that's going to eat away at the traffic that makes up the current internet and let's say the rules of the road, so to speak, where, content becomes a vessel for commerce. And if content is no longer a vessel for commerce, how do we think about what the next vessel for commerce is, which is maybe an answer, right? And maybe the new paradigm isn't ask, get blue link, go to website, hit back, go to other website, eventually buy something. Maybe the new paradigm of the internet is ask, get an answer, take an action. And so that changes kind of the rules of engagement and really upsets $100 billion open web ecosystem. And so our point of view was there's going to be a transition from pages to agents. Much like there was a transition from broadcast television to streaming, it might take a really long time, or because this is unlike anything we've ever seen before, it could happen very quickly. And so we wanted to build a business that was going to help the folks that rely on traffic, right? And the folks that want to continue to produce content and to prevent the world where the snake is eating its own tail. We wanted to enable them to be able to thrive in an AI first internet. And that was kind of the idea for Dappier. So at Dappier, our point of view is AI is going to be everywhere. As a media company, you have an audience today with an existing, revenue supply chain of how you monetize that audience. We want to provide you the tools to bring AI to that audience because they're starting to experience it at every other core consumer app. So again, they're seeing it on LinkedIn and Facebook and Amazon. When they're on your site, they're going to expect to see it as well. They're going to expect to be able to ask questions and get answers. So you'll be able to be at parity in providing a good consumer experience. That's our first kind of go to market and I guess product. We also want to provide an on-ramp for that content to be discovered and distributed into what we'll call the agentic web, because our point of view is, like I think you said, it's like, in order to be useful, every AI just kind of needs to have access to everything. If it's cut off from some certain piece of knowledge, it's just going to hallucinate something. It kind of quickly degrades into something useless. So we think about, and you might have seen things like the lawsuit between the New York Times and OpenAI and, other entities and other frontier models. Our point of view is like, why are we treating this as like the sky is falling? Why can't we instead, as an industry, think about this a completely new distribution opportunity where instead of like some company building an app or a website that is going to get pushed down to, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people. Instead, we now have tools that allow us each to all make stuff for ourselves. We might choose our model, kind of like what we talked about before, but we still want access to fresh content. And in order to get fresh content that isn't like, in order to avoid a dystopian future where we get all our news from sensors, right, that are sitting and telling us the weather, and news, we just need to provide a sustainable business model. So our role, like the way we see it, is like monetizing this transition, making it easier for media companies to navigate, helping them optimize and kind of take advantage of this technology to put in front of their owned and operated audiences today. And at the same time, thinking about what it's going to be like to monetize the distribution of that content into the next wave. So when someone comes to an AI and asks a question, if that answer is informed by your content, you get fair attribution and a slice of the revenue from the action. Yeah. So hopefully it wasn't. Yeah. It's just to unpack that. So I would say, like, to sum it up, like in a nice way, like our role at Dappier is to create a fair business model for context in the age of AI. And that's kind of what we're dedicated to and focused on. And this is like, it's a pretty big problem area, right? Because again, it's that $100 billion market that's being disrupted, and a lot of really interesting volatility as a result of that space, right? There's been, so like at the core of it is content. On its periphery is like advertising, right? I think there were some really exciting announcements that a lot of folks were talking about today from Mark Zuckerberg yesterday, talking about like, creative isn't going to matter. You're just going to tell us what outcome you want, right? And we'll go get it. And that changes a lot, right? And so anyway, that's yeah, there's a lot happening in that space, and it's moving very quickly.
Yeah. Do you think it's? I mean, there's too much to respond to.
Sure.
Do you think it's like what kind of disruptions are going to happen first? Do you think, like, based on this Mark Zuckerberg point?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what we're going to see is like, I think the core disruption maybe is that search is no longer Google. Search is unbundled across the web. So, um, when you read a book, right, or you read an article, that inspires a thought or an idea, and that then makes you go to Google and ask a question. That was the internet up until 2023, right? And now you read an article or have a question. Maybe most people still go to Google. Some people go to Perplexity. Most, people after Google go to ChatGPT. Um, but I think the first wave of that disruption is like, I want to be able to get more information everywhere, right? And so I think what you're going to see is like the ability to double click on anything and get more information. I think that's the first wave of disruption.
Hmm. And by anywhere you mean, we talked very briefly right before the recording, like on Twitter or something like that. Now it's
Yeah.
ask Grok. Is this true? Does this mean it? So is that what you mean by double click on anything, kind of anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, and I think, it could be like you're reading an article on a website and the article happens to be about something that's happening in your town, and you want to know more. Like, last time this happened, last time they voted on this issue, what happened, right? Um, when is the next vote? So essentially, content historically, maybe let me answer it a different way. Historically, the content on the web is static.
Right.
Every experience will now be dynamic.
That's crazy.
Like, because why are we deciding on some arbiter of information, right? To just like give us one very narrow point of view. Like, to your point, that's created a very polarized world.
Yes.
So I want to be able to, like, get an article, read it, and then ask about both sides of it, right? And I think that's kind of how the web changes, right? Yeah, I think that's a fundamentally different internet, which is dynamic. Um, and that creates like a really different set of opportunity. And so that's like what I think is like takes advantage of the current, kind of the current flywheel of the web, right? I'm on a web page, I get to another web page. Um, I think what you were just alluding to is like this concept I think a lot about, which is like I call invisible SaaS, right? And so, there's a whole ecosystem of influencers, right, out there that produce content on X and TikTok and all these other places. There's folks that have built great brands. There's new brands that are being born. Um, I think, if you look at Perplexity, they have this great tagline, right, on their X account. It's just ask everywhere. Maybe it's ask anywhere. I'll check that. But you can tap Perplexity on X with a question and get an answer and start a public conversation about that question. Um, what's recently what I saw like is a platform called Lovable, one of the kind of like develop AI development platforms that's out there, launched an account called Lovable Build, and you can at Lovable Build your idea, and they will send you back a build. Right? You can ask for a landing page, it'll give you one. What that means, like what I think that means, is that the next wave of software is just has no UI. Essentially, you're going to be able to trigger workflows from whatever point you're at. So if you're on X and you get a great idea, you can at GoDaddy probably in some near future and get your domain registered. And like that's I think where things go.
That's fascinating. So not only does that, avoid the stupid, create a username, registration on the website, you just kind of get the thing that you're desiring or wanting to build. And what does that do for like business across the world? Like it just seems like a
Dude, I
like
think it
like like like
changes
a superpower. Like it just efficiencies are going to be seen everywhere if this.
You're going to see efficiencies everywhere. I think you're going to see a crop of really interesting companies emerge around this concept
Mm.
that take advantage of this. And you're seeing it. I mean, like, one of our first experiments in the space was a thing called Pat, Hey Pat, which was an AI you can text. And like it was always going to be a wrapper, right? We saw ChatGPT. We're like, man, it would be amazing if all over the world people could just text it and you can add it to a group with your friends. And then it just kind of naturally made sense to add it to WhatsApp and add it to Twitter. And so we've been doing that for a while. And and then we kind of said like, okay, so, like what's the thing that captures people's imaginations? Well, all of a sudden, people are creating Ghibli images on ChatGPT, right? That becomes a mega trend. Well, anyone that's building on that API, I think they now have ImageN in their API, can deploy a service, right? Right now, wherever their agent can be interacted with, that can generate you an image. What are the possibilities of that? I mean, I just before hopping on this kind of conversation, I saw some influencer put out a post that had like, I don't know, it was a flash of like 30 logos. And it's like, whoever the first 50 people are to DM me, I'll send you a logo just like this. And like, I don't know what's on the other side of that, but if it's not an AI agent, that person is missing an opportunity because like, so I think these services will first be very narrow and then they're going to become very big. And that will be a primary interaction point. At some level, I mean, all of these interfaces, which for the most part suck, right? No matter what you're in, right? It's still like you have something like, ChatGPT, Claude, or Perplexity that kind of feel like magic in terms of their ability to distill knowledge, but signing into them still sucks, right? It's like
Sure.
it's a classic thing. And then, navigating and figuring out what to do and like what each little button does when you're selecting a model. It's like a step in the right direction, but I think maybe the next groundbreaking thing is like when the user interface really starts to go away. In a way, I think like things like Operator, right, where people are able to interact with the computer using AI, like that's a step in the right direction because that's how the world works today. It's almost like Figure AI and like what they're doing with humanoid robots is like the reason it makes sense to make robots look like humans is like the world is designed for a human. Um, but that's not necessarily the best way to accomplish something. So I think that's what we'll see. I think we're going to see these AIs get really good at navigating the world we created. And then we're going to start to see all those like kind of things that help us along the way go away.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, future is going to feel more natural and like a lot less as if you're interacting through something to get something. You're just going to be interacting with something to get whatever.
If we put up all these walls everywhere the way, we have all these barriers for every little thing. You start to see it already. So like in the same way that like like one industry that has gotten this so backwards is the video streaming industry, right? Like we created, everyone was pissed about cable. So then we got, Netflix and Roku and Apple TV and Vizio and Prime Video. And now I mean, this is a world I know a little bit about because I spent 5 years in the space, but we now have subscription fatigue like crazy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We have all these apps that are changing, cycling content around, on these weird random schedules that force us to cancel and resubscribe and all of these stupid things that are just like walls.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you that's the thing, like, man, I mean, if AI could accomplish breaking down some of those walls, that would be amazing. Because I mean, it's just silly. Like we're just, we're introducing friction where it doesn't need to be. Like at some level, maybe the future of video should just look like one giant YouTube. Maybe it will be YouTube, right? Like create content, publish in one place, discover anywhere, right? That's probably the world most people want. Now, you need a business model that supports that, right? You need the fun content, but in a world where you can generate, high res content using AI, maybe the business model is there. Maybe you don't need billion-dollar movies. So I think I think, invisible software, invisible services, invisible games. Like I think that's kind of where the world accrues to. Like, why do we need 5 million app store apps? I mean, that seems kind of crazy, right?
Right. That's crazy. Yeah, this is super, super interesting. I don't think I've heard of this idea of like the what would you call it? The invisible apps, this well technology, if you invisible software, exactly. Yeah, fascinating. Um, wow, yeah. So our time's winding down here a little bit, but
Sure.
one follow-up to that is like how do you as a human being change the way that you go through life a little bit? I don't know if this is too philosophical or something like that,
No,
but
I think it's a great
it's an
question.
interesting question, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, I don't necessarily think about it so much for me, probably because that's like, you like to think, I think everyone probably thinks they're very adaptable. Or I would say maybe it's to anyone's advantage to be very adaptable to change now. I would say, like, I think about it from the point of view of my kids, and from my kids, like, I tend to think, and again, and this could be entirely wrong, but, I think the most important skill in a world where you kind of have superpowers is the ability to think creatively, right? Because we all get superpowers now. And so there's a level of excitement around that. There's a level of anxiety around that, right? Some people use those powers for evil, that kind of thing. But I think for the future, it's just really important to be able to ask great questions and think about creative outcomes that maybe even range to what's seemingly impossible, because probably the whole point of all this stuff is to move the goal, kind of the needle further towards the scale of impossible, right? Like in our world, optimizing, the distribution for content to get in front of eyeballs. I mean, that's exciting and that'll help an industry greatly. But the hard tech that you can accomplish because you have these superpowers, I think is really exciting, right? Folks working on getting to space and, advancements in physics and math and science. So all of those kinds of things, I think, it require critical thinking. And now we all, like, Google did this incredible job, right, of organizing the world's information. And now we have this next level where we all get to read it instantly and make choices. And that's kind of the fundamental shift. So I think it's just, yeah, my recommendation is just like dive in as quickly as you can, start using these tools, because the faster you do, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, and the slower you are, the worse off you'll be. Is that
Exactly. Got it. And it might not be obvious for a long time in many industries, but I mean, the rate at which you can learn about something, I mean, it's instant in anything. That's a huge onslaught.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I think you've blown my mind enough for one day. And so, yeah, no, this is really fascinating. Yeah, thanks a ton for coming on. I think I have to end it here. Well, we'll have your website up on the show notes. Your LinkedIn. Are there any other places that you want people to follow you?
Oh yeah, on X would be great. I'm working, I'm working on getting some followers there, but I think it's just at Dan Goikhman. I'll send it to you. But yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. I'm sorry that I rescheduled a few times, but
No problem.
it's worked out.
Absolutely worth it. Yeah, I'm going to be thinking about this for the rest of the day and for all weekend. So thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome,
that's
man.
great.
Thanks, Mark. Have a great.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.